Hi everybody, it's Andy from True Blue Quilts. Thank you so much for joining me today. The topic today is paper piecing, and I have been working on a simple block, just 3 triangles there. I pulled this out of EQ8, which is a design software. I'm using these triangles as kind of a peaked mountain border for a medallion quilt that I'm working on. And I thought it would be a great time to share with you some of my tips for paper piecing. A lot of people are a little bit intimidated, and just like with anything else in the quilting world, try it. If you like it, great. If not, there's plenty of other methods that will keep you busy, but I really enjoy paper piecing. So some people that may not be familiar with this is sometimes referred to as foundation paper piecing. You'll see FPP in the quilting abbreviation world for that foundation. We're using paper as our foundation. You could also do some foundation quilting with other pieces, like people do strip quilts on muslin blocks, and that's just another type of foundation. But the beauty of foundation paper piecing is that you can get some pretty intricate designs and stars and just different shapes that you would not be able to create as easily if you didn't have that paper foundation. They're, a little more complicated to make, to get those sharp points. A lot of times is helpful to have that foundation, and just it just opens up a lot of design opportunity there that you can't get with just straight cuts and pieces. Obviously, our quilting heritage back in the day, decades ago, quilters would cut to the templates for all these different pieces, and you certainly could do that, but I have found it very easy to work with that paper foundation. One criticism of paper piecing is that there is a lot of waste because you are using oversized fabric pieces on top of that paper to make sure, because and I'll demonstrate this technique, but the way you have to position the fabric and then fold it in place, you definitely want to use an oversized piece, whereas if you were using a template, you may be able to use the exact shape and cut down. But you know what? They're making more and more beautiful fabric every day, so I'm not that worried about a little bit of waste. I'd rather save the time, improve my accuracy with the paper piecing foundation, and give up a little bit of that fabric. But if you are the type of person that hates to see any fabric go to waste, then you may want to choose another option. Okay, let's talk about some of the tools you want to gather before you start paper piecing. First off, you're going to be going back and forth from the machine to the cutting table quite a bit. So get yourself a smaller mat or set up your sewing space so that you have your cutting surface right next to your machine. That will save a lot of time and effort. I just bought this little, it's actually an OmniGrid portable cutting mat that's only about 7 inches square, and it's got this nice pressing surface on the other side. So this would be great to, put in your sewing kit if you were going to classes or other spaces, but it works great when I'm paper piecing small units. I can set it right here next to my machine and do all my cutting in between steps right from that. The add a quarter ruler is a lifesaver, and that's not going to show up very well here. Well, we'll do it like that on screen, but the add a quarter ruler, and they do make some that are at an eighth, I think. So if you are working with really tiny bits and one even narrower seam allowance, the beauty of this is the lip. there is a raised edge, a 1/4 inch raised edge on the side of this ruler. And I'll demonstrate in a minute, but that helps me guarantee that you've got that fabric positioned correctly and you've got your seam allowance your whole way through the project. I also like to keep a postcard handy or an index card. This is a little pitch for Quilts of Valor. A few years ago, I ordered some of these postcards to hand out at quilting events, and it's just nice and handy to keep in my paper piecing kit. But this helps you keep that edge. It gives the ruler something to butt up against when you're folding the fabric. So the simple process for paper piecing, I like to say it's a lot like color by number, because your pattern should be numbered with which pieces go together in what order, and you just figure out what color comes next, plop that into place. And the method for paper piecing is to fold, trim, add a piece, and sew. So that's what we're gonna do next. I'll give you a quick demonstration of paper piecing with this triangle pieced square. Here we go with these first two fabric pieces. When I start a paper piecing project, I always measure my units first of all. And so if I'm measuring across this triangle and it's about 5.5, and the height of this first piece is only 2 inches. So I'm going to make this piece a lot bigger than 2 by 5.5. I think I did 5.5 by 4. So you can see my first fabric is the same width as my paper. That makes sure I have all the seam allowances. And then I've got plenty above and below that triangle so that I can make sure that is lined up correctly and I don't have to worry about the exact position of anything. Paper piecing, I only need 1 pin for that first piece of fabric, and you want to put the paper on the wrong side of your first fabric. So I will line that up, and like I said, I made the fabric the same width as the paper, so if I just line that paper up with that fabric, then I know I'm good to go. And I'm going to be sewing on the line between 1 and 2. So when I pin, I want to pin away from that line. So I'm going to come way back here and pin that piece of fabric. You only need 1 pin to hold the paper in place for that first seam. And then once everything's sewn, then you will be ready to get rid of the pin and everything's secure on this foundation and you can just keep sewing. So here is my postcard. I'm going to lay the postcard right on that first line and fold. And then we're ready for step 2, which is trim. So I'm going to line up my ruler and cut away that excess fabric. And then I've got that seam allowance just past my first line. So then I'm going to flip this whole thing over, and this is the fabric edge that I'm going to be sewing along. So I take my second piece, which I had already pre-measured, and I line that up right along. I've already measured the seam allowance, so if I line that up right on the edge, I know it's in position to sew. And then this sometimes can be tricky, but I always double check by folding that back. And yes, I've got a little bit more generous seam allowance when I fold than when I actually sew, which is a good thing because then you know you are completely in the right place. And then I usually just hold this up above my head to the light, and you can tell that you've got enough fabric all the way around that area. Make sure it covers the seam allowance there. it looks like I'm a little bit short, but with that excess fold that's not right on the seam allowance, I'm not worried about just that little bit of corner that looks like it's off the fabric. So I know I've got this in a good position, so I can turn it back over, and I am ready to take it to my sewing machine for that last step in the process. Remember to use a short stitch length when you are paper piecing. That just makes the final step of tearing the paper away go a little bit easier, and you'll be good to go. So those are my reminders for paper piecing. Simple steps: fold the paper pattern, trim the excess with your add a quarter ruler, add the next piece of fabric, and sew with a shorter stitch length. So I hope you give paper piecing a try and learn to love it as much as I do. If you would like to see some of my paper pieced patterns, you can hop over to truebluequilts.com and look in my pattern shop for those. Last year I had a lot of fun with the Purple Angles quilt. So this is an easy project. You can see the full quilt in my shop, and just one block. You sew 4 identical quadrants and you've got a great pillow there. So I'm excited to see how many other paper piecing fans are out there. Click on the video below to see the full Purple Angles quilt, and subscribe to this channel to be the first to hear about my new designs. I'll see you in the next video.